The last person we like who's going to give us a little insight is Tina. Tina, many of you know because she stayed at Illinois and has been sort of the mainstay of the Gunsalus clan here. Tina is, she's going to tell us her black sheep story, I'm sure. She's the only non-scientist in the family, but she's shown her mettle and lived up to the Gunny standard. She's been, I guess she's been almost everything on this campus. Assistant Vice Chancellor to now she's very involved in education and teaching in professional schools, the law school, the medical school, the business school. And I'm sure she's got probably more stories than anybody, got any stories to tell than anybody in the family. So Tina?
Okay, here's the black sheep story. I'm a lawyer. And the scientists in my family consider what I do the waste of a pretty good genetic heritage. And almost all of them still acknowledge me in public. Our dad was a really complicated guy. And I'm going to tell you a story about how we learned about his death. We learned about his death one Thursday morning in October when we opened our front door. And there was Giovanna on our doorstep, distraught, holding a box, and she said, "This is Gunny." And Giovanna had, because he had sworn her to do so on things that were sacred and meaningful to her, carried out his wishes, which was that he be able to live, he was 96 years old, and have his death as he wished it, in his own bed, in his own house. And he did. He controlled his death, and he didn't want anybody to know about it until he was cremated and the ashes were delivered, actually, and scattered, because he controlled his death as he controlled his life. And so it was a little bit of a shock. I'd had some surgery recently, so I was at home. It was fortunate I was there on a Thursday morning in October. And so we started calling people to let them know. And I think it was Hannah Hastings who, when I called and said, she said, "No, Gunny is forever." And I think that that's how a lot of people felt, and I think that it sort of sums up a lot of things. And when I was thinking about what to say, the first thing that came to mind was that his life was sort of like a symphony that had a whole series of different movements. There was South Dakota and the prairie and his time as an Eagle Scout and what he learned from he still talks about the name of his third grade teacher, he did talk about the name of his third grade teacher, Evangeline MacArthur. She was a big lady, influenced his life and convinced him about how important education was. So there was the South Dakota years, where he went off to Cornell with his scoutmaster, when he was an Eagle Scout. There were the Ithaca years. Then we had the Bloomington years. Then we had the Urbana years, which probably encompassed the main central chapter of his story. After Urbana, we had the United Nations, the commuting between Trieste and New Delhi and Urbana. He was in his 70s then. And we had the job with the Environmental Protection Agency in Florida, where when he was in his late 80s, he decided to go to part-time work, finally retiring when he hit 90. And across those movements, there were some themes that recurred in each one. There was the wine. There was the control over things. When he was in Urbana, his idea of landscaping was to move most of the trees every year in the yard to give a more pleasing vista as they reached different sizes. Ithaca and Cold Spring Harbor and Woods Hole had the sailing theme that went through. We had the photography theme. You'll see a lot of the pictures of him have him with an enormous camera around his neck. And he took some extraordinary portraits of people over the years, and some of the portraits in the slideshow are pictures that he took of people that are real character studies. This was a complicated man of great accomplishment. And so I switched, a true son of the prairie. And I was thinking about these themes and what went through all these movements, and I finally decided that the symphony metaphor just was not cutting it, because this man was more like a force of nature. So I got to thinking about a tsunami. Because the thing about him is that if you were far enough away, you could surf on the waves. And the closer you got to the center, the rougher the water was. In that very same car that Michelle was talking about, that yellow Malibu, My dad and I were driving one day, and he was cataloging my many failings at the time, as I recall, and it was pretty brutal. I was not making sense. The highest accolade in my family is, oh, she's beginning to make sense now. I was not making sense, and he was listing my failings, and he saw at the corner of Goodwin and Green a woman trying to cross the street who was blind, and she kept making false starts, and the cars kept going, and she kept going. And he took that car and he pulled it across all the lanes of traffic, diagonal, held up his hand so everybody stopped, got out of his car, went and escorted the lady across the street, got back in the car, told the traffic it could go on, straightened the car out, and picked up exactly mid-sentence where he had left off, letting me know everything I was doing wrong. So, being around him meant coming to terms with a lot of things. Having children, I think, actually gave me more insight into him than many other things, because as I had children and raised them, it became clear to me that he had to have grown up in an incredibly critical environment, because his first impulse, as an expression of love often, an expression of caring, was to criticize so that you could get better. And that's a really hard concept to get when you're small. And so I ended up with a measure of compassion and certainly an enormous appreciation for the people that we met, the exposure to ideas in the world and who we could be. And so I guess I would leave you with this thought. We had, since he has died, we've had scores of people write to us attesting the horizons he opened, the opportunities he provided, the excitement of the journey that he provided with gratitude and affection. One of them wrote, "I'll never forget Gunny's charm, his wit, his warmth, his friendliness, his humor, and his knowledge. He was capable of extraordinary kindness. He was capable, and he stimulated tremendous loyalty. His work was meaningful, and it'll be remembered. And you could leave a lesser legacy." The world shifts when a generation passes. For a child who loses a parent, the world is a little different. For a student who loses a mentor, because now you're the generation that has to mentor in your own turn. For the colleague who loses a collaborator. Even if you don't have daily contact with the person who's gone, knowing the person is out there makes the world a stable and secure place. So keeping with the nature metaphor, the earth has shifted. And we've had the tectonic plates have moved, leaving upheaval from behind. And it's now our turn to keep Gunny forever, and to keep the world going, and to pass along some of the lessons and the gifts we've received. I'd like to thank you all for coming on behalf of the family. I hope you'll enjoy the slideshow. I hope you'll enjoy lunch, and I hope that you will help all of us keep Gunny forever. Thank you.
I think with that, we'll adjourn to circulate and tell stories, and we'll have a slideshow here, which is roughly chronological.
Yep.
Most of the people I know, some of them I don't, and probably a lot of them you won't know.
And we have the video camera, and we're going to move it and set it up, and we're going to put these up. And if you have a Gunny story to come tell us on tape, we would love to have your Gunny stories on video, and we'll set up a corner for that, and we would love to hear them. Enjoy lunch.